Hi, this is Jennifer Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I'm delighted to welcome to our program Congressman Joe Neguse. He is from Colorado. Many of you remember him from the impeachment hearings. He continues to labor on behalf of democracy and middle class and working class people. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Jennifer. I'm delighted.
Republicans are supposedly working on a budget. They had the so-called vote-a-rama in the Senate on Thursday night into early Friday morning. What is going on in the House?
House Republicans are pursuing an extreme budget reconciliation plan, a resolution that they passed out of committee about a week ago, and by all accounts intend to bring to the House floor on Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. The resolution, very clear, very straightforward to understand. It's a $4.5 trillion budget plan that would slash and cut tax rates for billionaires and corporations, some of the biggest tax hikes, or excuse me, tax cuts that you can imagine for the richest Americans. And they do that by essentially gutting every social safety net program that one could conceive of. That includes, as you know, about $800 billion of cuts to Medicaid. As well as the Affordable Care Act, $200 billion to food assistance programs, and a number of other really draconian cuts to programs that everyday Americans across rural America, rural parts of my district rely on. It would be a devastating budget if it were enacted into law for the American people, and it gives you a sense as to their priorities, which, of course, in my view, are deeply out of step with the American people.
Just to remind people, because we had this issue come up in Trump 1.0 when he tried to eliminate the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid does a great number of things in addition to providing health care for the poor. Talk to us a little bit about how it helps seniors, people who are addicted and going through anti-addiction programs. This affects many, many millions of people who may or may not be eligible for the most basic sort of Medicaid, which is a backstop for the poor.
Yeah, that's such a salient point, Jennifer. So, of course, when folks think of Medicaid, they, obviously think of the underserved, right? And individuals, vulnerable populations accessing life-saving healthcare. And of course, that's an important part of Medicaid. But as you said, Medicaid serves a broad cross-section of the American public. And that includes a large portion of seniors who, of course, are obviously on Medicare, but with respect to long-term care and nursing care, the vast majority of those expenditures are on the Medicaid side. And again, these are services that are provided not just in urban America, suburban America, rural America, every corner of the country. Rehabilitation services, as you mentioned, mental health provisioning. It is a critically important program that benefits a lot of Americans. And an $800 billion cut, it is hard to overstate the impact that type of cut would have on day-to-day experiences of senior citizens, of Americans writ large. It's one of the reasons why I think that this budget ultimately, if we can, build enough public outcry and pressure, will not succeed. And you can see this, by the way. I'm sure you've seen some of the coverage already in some of the town halls and a variety of settings in which I think individuals, constituents are really expressing their alarm, their frustration, their outrage at the budget plan that the Republicans are pursuing.
I do want to absolutely talk about how unpopular these things are, but let me ask a question. It's not meant to be facetious. What difference does it make what budget Congress passes if Elon Musk, who no one elected to anything, just comes along, shuts down departments, fires people, in essence becomes the head of the executive branch? What guarantees do you have that even whatever budget you do pass will be fulfilled?
Yeah, I don't think that's a facetious question at all. I don't think it's a rhetorical question either. It's you've squarely articulated the central conundrum, the central challenge that we are facing in terms of the checks and balances and the separation of power as enshrined in our kind of constitutional order, and that's governed for the better part of the last 2.5 centuries. Article 1, obviously, as you know, gives Congress, gives the House of Representatives, the Senate, the power of the purse. And I think you raise a reasonable question that's being adjudicated in federal courts across the country as we speak, which is to say, how is it permissible, and of course it's not, for the executive to not spend, to not expend the dollars to follow the law and enforce the law and ensure those laws are faithfully executed as Congress has passed them. And one of the most confounding parts of this particular moment for me, Jennifer, and I suspect maybe for you as well, is to see my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who, some of them at least, in the past, have been very vocal about defending the constitutional prerogatives of Congress as the Article 1 branch of government, now just be completely silent and compliant and capitulate to this president and to Elon Musk. You raise an important question. It will be, in my view, without telegraphing any strategies in advance here, over the next 4 weeks as we reach near the March 14th continuing resolution deadline. But it's suffice to say, I think that what you just described will be center stage in terms of the debate around the appropriations for the next fiscal year. Because at the end of the day, the executive has to comply with the law. And federal courts are doing their part. Thus far, I think, Article 3 branch of our government is working to ensure that the constitutional order is maintained. But the Congress is going to have to do its part as well. And I think we're going to have some opportunities here in the coming weeks.
And to clarify for our audience, the continuing resolution allows the government to keep the lights on now. What we're discussing is a potential budget resolution for the next fiscal year. But of course, they didn't do their job last year. So they made a deal to keep the government kind of on cruise control until March. But if they don't reach a deal, the government will shut down. Do you believe that there are enough Republicans who are together on this issue to actually keep the government going? Or are they going to have to come to Democrats and say, oh, can you help us keep the government operating?
First, I would say the distinction you made is very important. The kind of parallel path, obviously, the continuing resolution that expires on March 14th and the budget to keep the lights on, and then the budget resolution as part of the reconciliation plan that House Republicans and Senate Republicans are pursuing, although, of course, they can't come to an agreement either, as you know. And so it's consistent with the dysfunction that the Republican Party has embraced over the last several years. If past its prologue, as you know, in the 118th Congress, House Republicans were incapable of governing and could not pass any budget bill or bills relating to the debt ceiling and other integral matters without the support of Democrats. I don't believe, so to the core question you asked, I don't believe that they're going to have a sufficient majority, notwithstanding that they are in the majority, a fragile majority in the House, to pursue that path. I think the real operative question for me, and I suppose you again already articulated this, it's whether or not there will be a sufficient number of Republican members of Congress who will stand up and make clear that an appropriation that is passed by Congress and signed into law by the president must be enforced and faithfully executed by the president. And that, to me, is the central question. And that's an open question. I don't know whether or not there will be a sufficient number of Republicans who would step up and make that clear. But we'll see. Time will tell.
Two important points you made. One, these cuts are so extreme, and the so-called freezes that Musk has already tried to impose, that there's not a single congressional district in the country that would not be affected. And at the same time, we see in every bit of polling, whether it's releasing the January 6th and commuting the sentences of the January 6th felons, whether it is eliminating USAID, whether it's giving access to the Doge folks of our tax information, that this is highly unpopular with the American people. What happens when your Republicans go back to their districts? Do they hear from businesses? They hear from farmers? They hear from ordinary voters? Stop this. This is not what we voted for.
Yeah, one would certainly hope that that's the case. I would say, I hold a lot of town halls in Colorado. I love doing town halls. I think it's one of the best ways to connect with my constituents, to get a pulse as to how my community is feeling and to be responsive to their concerns. But as you know, members doing town halls, particularly on the Republican side, has become much more rare in recent years. And so I don't know that they are hearing from their constituents at the volume that you've described, although there are some indications in the last 48 hours, again, based off of some of what I saw regarding some town halls, a town hall in Georgia, and a Republican colleague of ours in Ohio who made some statements regarding the Trump administration executive orders being out of control, something to that effect. It's clear that they are beginning to hear from the broad cross-section of Americans who are deeply concerned about the unlawful nature of the administration's directives and unconstitutional executive orders. I'll just tell you from my perspective, because I think you know my district, but I represent northern Colorado, western Colorado. It's a large district, larger than 9 states. And we have a lot of public lands managed by the Forest Service, by the BLM. Western wildfires, of course, becoming more prevalent here in Colorado and in the Rocky Mountain West. And the cuts are devastating. These mass indiscriminate terminations of Forest Service folks, rangers and people doing search and rescue efforts, people who are helping wildland firefighters, forestry technicians and the like. A real challenge in terms of public safety for our community, and to hear from local law enforcement, local jurisdictions, stakeholders about that impact, that harm. I have to imagine that my Republican colleagues are hearing the same thing in their respective districts. And the question again will be whether or not they are willing to step up and speak truth to power and say this is too far. And I am not sure that they'll be willing to do that. Again, you mentioned my role as an impeachment manager 4 years ago, and that experience, left me perhaps a bit jaded about the ability in a hyper-polarized political environment for my Republican colleagues to do the right thing and speak to their conscience. But again, I certainly hope that that'll be the case.
Thank you so much for coming and explaining this to us, Congressman. We will definitely have you back to explain all of this. And I would say to our viewers, our readers at The Contrarian, look up these town halls and go to them peacefully, politely, make your voice heard. Go and tell Congressman what you want and what you don't want. That is the democratic process. So we do hope that more of them hear from all of you and the general public. So thank you again, Congressman Neguse. We'll look forward to having you next time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good to see you.